Chapter 2, a very good thing and a very bad thing. A loud fart echoed around the hall from somewhere up the back. Angus bit down on his lip, trying not to laugh, while next to him Hamish's body was silently shaking. The whole school was gathered for afternoon assembly. Other kids snickered, guffawed, or snorted in less successful attempts at self control. Up the front, Mr. Dingwall, the principal, announced he was not amused and demanded to know who the culprit of the offending fart was. No one came forward. And did everyone else think it was funny, did they? Of course they did, but even Perry kept his hand down. With the crowd under control again, Mr. Dingwall returned to his rant over the recent thefts of smart devices. The school had implemented a new policy called Bring Your Own Device, and if you were lucky enough to own an iPad, tablet, or laptop, you were allowed, encouraged in fact, to bring it to school for use in class. Unsurprisingly, in Angus's opinion, a person or persons were now helping themselves to other people's devices willy-nilly. Specifically, one laptop, two iPads, and one tablet had gone missing. And with the addition of Layla's phone today, it was apparent the thief was now branching out into mobile communications. While Angus didn't have his own phone, he had just received a much longed for iPad for his birthday, but he had no plans to bring it to school. At least once a term he lost his hat, lunchbox, or pencil case and was under no illusions about his ability to hang on to something as expensive as an iPad. And this was just as well, because his mother had said it would go to school over her dead body, which Angus thought was a little extreme, but that was mothers for you. Like a couple of angry caterpillars going head to head, Mr. Dingwall's eyebrows jumped fitfully as he reiterated that this sort of behaviour will not be tolerated and the thief or thieves will be caught. For emphasis, he stabbed a stubby finger at the air with each word. Angus shifted his behind uncomfortably on the hard floor and silently wished the principal would hurry up and move on to what he hoped was coming next. And finally he did. Dingwall rearranged his face into what passed for a smile, but only just. And now, he said, on to a more pleasant item. As you all know, our robotics club have been working hard recently in the lead up to the Regional Robotics Championship, which many of you watched last week here in our very own hall. Angus sneaked a nervous grin at Hamish. It gives me great pleasure to announce that the winning team, with their champion robot, the Detonator, is... Angus's heart gave its own drum roll. Angus Adams and Hamish McLeod. There it was. Through a sea of high fives and back pats, they made their way up to the front of the hall. With his heart still thumping, Angus had to admit this was pretty cool. They always tell you that winning isn't everything, but geez, it's not nothing either. And he and Hamish deserved it. Their detonator robot, designed and built by the two of them, had smashed the opposition from 5 other schools out of the ring, literally. On the day, it looked as if the title was theirs. But then the team they'd beaten in the final round had lodged a protest, something about their robot breaking a technical rule, so they'd had to wait a whole agonising week to hear the final decision. The protest was dismissed by all 3 adjudicators. Boys, well done, said Mr. Dingwall as he pumped Angus's hand with a meaty paw. Mrs. Nesbitt, their robotics instructor, clapped wildly from the sideline, pausing to give him a thumbs up when she caught Angus's eye. Mrs. Nesbitt looked like your garden variety grandmother. Think pink cardigans and grey bun. You expected her to know more about knitting than robotics. But you had to give the woman her due. She knew her EV3s from her RSXs, and what she didn't know about psyching out the opposition wasn't worth knowing. At the regionals, her advice to Angus and Hamish had been to send the competition home crying, in a fair and sportsmanlike way, of course. Handing the boys each a laminated certificate, Mr. Dingwall said, and of course, as winners of the regional competition, you will both be going to Sydney next month to compete in the national championships. The hall again broke out in applause. Mrs. Nesbitt actually punched the air. Angus and Hamish grinned again at one another in surprise. No one had said anything about this. Going to Sydney for the nationals. Them. That wasn't just cool, that was totally awesome. Back in their places, the boys risked whispering to each other as Dingwall droned on about playground litter. Hamish was concerned his overprotective mother wouldn't let him go to Sydney all by himself. Angus pointed out he wouldn't actually be by himself, and surely they'd each be allowed to bring a parent with them. Still, Hamish said he wasn't sure he even wanted the helicopter. to come. He called his mother, the helicopter, not to her face, of course, due to her tendency to hover over him at all times and her firm belief this was necessary to keep him safe from asthma attacks, accidents, stray dogs, bad people, and insect bites. Angus thought Hamish was a bit unfair to his mother, who was a nice lady, never missing an opportunity to offer Angus homemade cakes, muffins, and assorted pastries, as she believed him to be a little on the thin side. She was a bit like a rescue helicopter, dropping packages of baked goods. At home later, Angus leant his bike against the garage wall. A tidal wave of rock music from the 1970s rolled out of the house and washed over him. This meant Dad was home, and Mum was not. In the kitchen, as Dad was cooking spaghetti bolognese, he turned the music down a couple of notches and tossed Angus an onion. "There you go, mate, just in time." As Angus chopped with swimming goggles on for onion fume protection, he filled his dad in on winning the robotics regional and the trip to Sydney. Liam, Angus's younger and only brother, looked up from his homework at the kitchen table and stopped picking his nose long enough to comment on how unfair it was that he wouldn't be able to go to Sydney. Then he went back to his homework with one hand while the other continued trying to remove a stubborn booger that was putting up a fight. Angus pushed the onion and mince around the pan with a wooden spoon. It was now sizzling and spitting merrily, and the kitchen filled with a delicious aroma. Angus opened a can of crushed tomatoes, feeling happy and hungry. There was a slight problem of who he would ask to go to Sydney with him, Mum or Dad, but there was no need to stress about that yet. Just as he was about to pour the tomatoes into the pan, his mother walked through the door and stopped. She stood there looking at him. This was a bit weird, as usually the first thing she did was throw her bag onto the nearest chair and kick off her shoes. "Mum, what's wrong?" he said, taking off his goggles. "The school's just called me," she said with an oddly unreadable face. "They want you in the principal's office immediately." "Huh? Why? Is this about Sydney?" "Sydney? What? No, Angus." Of course his mother didn't even know about Sydney yet. "It's about phones. They say